Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Dominique Burgeon, and I'm the director of the FAO office in Geneva. And I would like to warmly welcome you to the ninth SITS Solution Dialogue, which we organize in close cooperation with the FAO liaison offices in New York, Brussels, as well as with the office for SITS, LDCs, and LLDCs. And I would like to extend our great appreciation to the permanent representatives, delegates, and distinguished guests for joining us today in person in Geneva, but also for those participating online in various locations. Today, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, today on behalf of FAO, I would like to start by expressing our sincere condolences and full solidarity to our colleagues in the Caribbean after the devastating impact of Hurricane Melissa, which made landfall in Jamaica on 28 October as a Category 5 storm, leaving widespread destruction in its path. And also express our solidarity to other countries and who have also been affected, such as Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and other parts of Central America and the Caribbean. And I would say that in that context, we decided together with the colleagues in Rome, New York, and Brussels that it would be most appropriate to enable our colleagues to share with us their initial analysis of the storm impact and the urgent needs it identified. And for that, I'm very pleased to have with me Excellency Anne-Catherine Lassègue, who is the permanent representative of Haiti, but also the coordinator of the CARICOM group in Geneva, and His Excellency Dr. Richard Brown, who is the permanent representative of Jamaica. And without further delay, I would like to give you the floor, Ambassador, on behalf of Haiti and the CARICOM group in Geneva.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Excellencies, colleagues, on behalf of CARICOM, I express appreciation to the Food and Agriculture Organization and its partner office for convening this dialogue, which highlight a vital question: how to feed our population in a world increasingly affected by climate disruption. The tragedies we face are not abstraction and not mere concept in a technical report. They have name, faces, and stories. Our shared objective is to strengthen food security and resilient livelihood in small island developing states. Just days ago, Hurricane Melissa swept across the Caribbean, taking with it homes, dreams, and years of work. In Jamaica, entire villages were submerged. More than 700,000 children were affected across the region. In Haiti, preliminary figures indicate at least 26 fatalities, 18 missings, and 17 injured. Over 50,000 people displaced. More than 1,000 houses flooded and few health facilities affected. Approximately 1.6 million children in Haiti live in areas exposed to storms' impact. As we speak, entire communities are still living in the mud, counting their loss, rebuilding with their bare hand what the sea and the wind destroyed. Hurricane no longer follow the rhythm of the season. They now dictate the rhythm of our emergencies. In the spirit, some collective action that we can work on, such as faster, simpler access to climate and resilience, investment in resilient food system like climate smart agriculture, water management, coastal protection, and inclusive social protection that support job, nutrition, and risk reduction. regional cooperation and knowledge sharing, which is really important, that could accelerate appropriate technologies such as early warning and data service and locally led solution. We look forward to using today's dialogue to link finance to implementation and implementation to measurable outcomes so that small island developing state can plan, can invest, and can deliver with confidence. The storm may continue to blow, but our determination to protect our people must blow stronger still. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your remarks, covering both Melissa as well as the topic of our discussion today. And I'm now pleased to give the floor to Ambassador Brown for his takes on the impact of Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, good morning and good afternoon. First, to express my sincere appreciation to the FAO liaison officer in Geneva for the opportunity to address you all today. In the context of climate and environment financing for SIDS, systems transformation. As you all be well aware by now, Jamaica recently experienced the devastating effects of Hurricane Melissa, a Category 5 system that impacted the island last Tuesday, leaving behind an apocalyptic trail of destruction on its way. Understandably, the attention of the government of Jamaica is now focused on the very urgent response, relief, and recovery efforts that are needed to alleviate the suffering of our citizens, whose lives, livelihoods, and property have been decimated by this catastrophic event, as well as to mobilize support for rebuilding efforts to do so in a climate and environmentally resilient manner. The impact of Hurricane Melissa on Jamaica and other SIDS in the region has in many ways served to underscore the critical call that SIDS have been making over 3 decades now regarding the urgent climate crisis. This was again declared at the recent AOC summit held in the margins of the UNG in September, at which AOC's leaders called for acknowledgement of the special circumstances of SIDS and reaffirmed that SIDS remained a special case in relation to the need for sustainable development in view of our unique and particular vulnerabilities, including our small size, remoteness, narrow resource and export base, external economic shocks, and of course, exposure to global environmental challenges. Jamaica's recent experience now serves as a test case and proof of concept of these special circumstances, proving that regardless of strong macroeconomic and fiscal discipline, as well as prudent economic management, our economies and societies remain at the mercy of external shocks that are beyond our control. In our case, Jamaica has, through strict discipline and austerity measures, including adherence to the established orthodoxy of multilateral financial institutions over the last decade, managed to achieve a more than 50% reduction in our debt to GDP level, reduced both our unemployment and inflation rates to historically low single digits, and have been experiencing positive economic growth rates over the last several years, with great hopes and prospects for a more prosperous future. However, as our experience now shows, all of the difficult sacrifices and hard-won progress can be totally wiped out in a matter of hours from a single climatic event, setting back our developmental progress by up to a decade or even more, even while the country was still recovering from the debilitating effects of the Category 3 Hurricane Beryl, which struck the island in June last year, devastating our agricultural sector. The frequency and intensity of these weather events therefore remains a pernicious threat to SIDS, like Jamaica, and further underscores the need for and importance of providing more just, equitable, and accessible climate and environmental finance to aid in the adaptation, mitigation, and response to these now permanent environmental threats. Hurricane Melissa, which made landfall in our main agricultural belt, totally decimated our breadbasket parish of St. Elizabeth and equally wiped out critical agricultural regions, such as the parishes of Westmoreland, Clarendon, and St. Ann, resulting in significant loss of life and causing billions of dollars of damage, thus threatening Jamaica's food and livelihood security for months and years to come. While the government of Jamaica has been very prudent and strategic in putting in place the first of its kind catastrophe bond with the assistance of the World Bank, as well as parametric insurance through the Regional Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, CCRIF, and has also put in place domestic crop insurance facilities to support farmers, which may all serve as best practices for SIDS in responding to the climate crisis. The sheer scale, intensity, and indeed the frequency of damage caused by climatic and environmental shocks as is now the lived experience of Jamaica, cannot be easily overcome through singular domestic effort, and thus requires concerted international collaboration and cooperation. Such cooperation must be manifested through more innovative, adaptive, and responsive financial mechanisms that allow SIDS to not only quickly and effectively restart their economies after catastrophic weather and environmental shocks, but that also support the transformation of their agri-food systems to make them more resilient and future-proof, particularly to safeguard our vulnerable populations. In closing, it is therefore critical that SIDS and partner organizations like the FAO redouble their advocacy and collaboration at the global level to ensure that the special circumstances and status of SIDS are both recognized and firmly entrenched in the design, interpretation, and implementation of all multilateral agreements by all international organizations and institutions. We must further work together to ensure that existing mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, and the Loss and Damage Fund are fully capitalized and made operationally effective and responsive to the needs of SIDS. It would also be critical to ensure that our broader priorities in the advancement of financial justice are given full effect. This includes increased access for SIDS to concessional climate financing on more equitable terms and conditions, and with built-in debt alleviation clauses that are appropriate for and adaptable to their level of climate and environmental risk to promote the sustainable development of SIDS, including the transformation of their agri-food systems. It is therefore imperative that urgent action is taken now in order to safeguard our collective future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you both ambassadors for sharing your views and update on the situation regarding the impact of Hurricane Melissa. And I would like now just to add a few words on FAO current activities. As a matter of fact, in response to Melissa, FAO has activated coordinated actions across the sub-region, focusing on Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, and prioritizing protection of agricultural and fisheries livelihoods, rapid impact analysis, and support to government-led coordination. In Jamaica, for example, FAO is supporting the Caribbean Disaster Management Agency, CDMA, led needs assessment, complemented by remote sensing. In Cuba, implementation of the SURF anticipatory action is ongoing, and inputs have departed and should reach Cuba very soon. In Haiti, rapid assessment with the Minister of Agriculture indicates significant losses in a number of crops, such as plantain, beans, and maize, along with high livestock mortality and loss of small-scale fisheries equipment, fishing gears in particular. As also access remains limited due to flooded rivers and road cuts, and FAO and the ministry will therefore pair qualitative reporting with household-based rapid damage assessments to make sure that we support agricultural production, especially in the Grand Sud when access permits. So just to demonstrate that FAO is on the ground, working side by side with government and supporting government-led efforts in these countries, and will continue to do so and possibly increase its support in the coming days and weeks. So following this, I would say, exceptional and unfortunate addition to the agenda, let me go back to today's SID Solution Dialogue, which, as you know, is on climate and environment financing for SIDS agri-food system transformation. And as I indicated at the beginning, this is the 9th dialogue in our series. As you know, the UN Climate Change Conference, COP29, held last year in Baku, emphasized a new financial goal aimed at strengthening global efforts in mitigation, adaptation, and capacity building, as well as protecting people and economies from the impact of climate disasters. Indeed, adequate and predictable climate, as well as environment financing, are essential to enable SIDS to transform their agri-food system, to strengthen adaptation capacity, and to advance sustainable development. To address the issue of climate financing, FAO, of course, is very much involved and supports countries with access to finance through several funding channels, including the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility and Adaptation Fund, and more recently, the newly established Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. With this in mind, we have organized today's session with the aim to explore how SIDS can leverage key financing mechanisms to transform their agri-food systems by sharing experience across regions. So without further ado, let me pass the floor to Her Excellency Ambassador Ilana Victoria Said, a permanent representative of Palau to the UN in New York and chair of EOSIS. Ambassador, the floor is yours to deliver some opening remarks to today's dialogue.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, and thank you for this opportunity to join you virtually and for convening this important SIDS Solutions Dialogue on Climate and Environment Financing for the transformation of SIDS agri-food systems. I'd like to acknowledge the FAO liaison offices in Brussels, Geneva, and New York, as well as the FAO Office of SIDS, LDCs, and LLDCs, and the FAO's Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Environment for organizing the event and for their continued support of SIDS. Small island developing states face unique challenges to our agri-food systems. Fisheries, which is a cornerstone of our economies, and nutrition are increasingly threatened by warming seas and overfishing. Small-scale farming, which sustains local communities, faces soil degradation, limited arable land, and water scarcity. These realities are reflected in our NDCs and demand urgent attention. Transforming our agri-food systems is essential for food security, for nutrition, and for resiliency. To achieve this, climate finance must be structured to address the specific economic and structural realities of SIDS. We cannot fit a one-size-fits-all approach for emerging markets and developing countries. We need differentiated access modalities as well as grant and highly concessional finance. This is not a preference. It's rooted in SIDS being internationally recognized as a unique case for sustainable development, which include climate action and support. And the Ambassador of Jamaica had mentioned the special circumstances of SIDS. So Excellencies, colleagues, there were many calls made to climate finance providers to enhance such finance to developing countries, especially SIDS and LDCs. And with last year's decision on the new climate finance goal and CQG being the most recent. One of these commitments includes an undertaking to significantly increase public resources going towards these multilateral climate funds and to drastically scale up their share of finance delivered towards achieving the new climate finance goal. And this highlights the great importance that we as SIDS place on these multilateral climate funds delivering for us. Moreover, this undertaking included a commitment to at least tripling annual outflows from these funds, especially through the Green Climate Fund, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environment Facility. So my question is simple, colleagues. Will these and other commitments like them be urgently delivered? And I think that's kind of the key question that we have to ask amongst ourselves and with all the partners. These climate funds must ensure eligibility for all SIDS, no matter their income classification. They must provide simple and context-specific access to all SIDS to meet our needs, as well as concessionality of climate finance on a grant or concessional basis. And access must not be delayed by bureaucracy or overly complex requirements. So Excellencies and colleagues, as we look forward to leaders who contribute to these funds, as well as the secretariats of these funds to continue to rise to the challenge and courageously fill the support gaps that are widening for SIDS. AOSIS will continue to engage with others to move from promises to action, ensuring that climate finance commitments translate into real-world outcomes that enhance our resilience, safeguard livelihoods, and protect the future of our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for your remarks and for providing your, and I believe also EOSIS perspective regarding climate and environment financing, which can indeed serve as a very valuable example. And I would like now to move to our next speaker, this time in Brussels. So we are really a global meeting, and I'm delighted to give the floor to His Excellency Gilbert van Lierop, who is the ambassador of Suriname to the Kingdom of Belgium and the EU. Ambassador van Lierop, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good day, friends, colleagues. In Suriname, we would say Brada Nanga Sisa, which means brothers and sisters, because we are all brothers and sisters. The topic I wish to address is transformation requires systems, not silos. When I became ambassador in Brussels, one of the first things I did was create a European think tank to foster private sector engagement between Europe and Suriname, because public sector alone doesn't have enough funds or liquidity to foster the change we need. Because Suriname is carbon negative and the most forested country on earth, the think tank quickly proposed a play where we generate carbon debits through forest regeneration. Together with Surinamese private sector entities, they started an agroforestry project in 2023. Today, they plant trees to offset carbon emissions. They work with tribal communities in Suriname. They empower food insecurity by growing crops that sustain local community. However, scaling up this project has proven difficult. Limited capacity and procedural complexity remain the primary barriers to accessing finance. So what do I mean with building the system? Coming from a standpoint of practice, I will propose 4 actions today. The first one, increase stakeholder participation through the creation of a SIDS Agri-Food Acceleration Consortium. This can share knowledge, facilitate and co-develop programmatic pipelines in climate-smart agriculture, aquaculture, coastal ecosystem protection. It can bring think tanks, private sector entities, and national designated authorities together to ensure synergy and rapid approvals. This consortium can build on the high-level ministerial event held during the 44th session of the FAO Ministerial Conference. Second, we should move differently. Finance and mobility together create conditions for speed, accountability, and scale. That's why SIDS must work toward vis-a-vis travel for service and diplomatic passports among SIDS and stakeholder countries. This would allow actors to move rapidly between SIDS and donor capitals, finalizing proposals, transferring technology, and overseeing implementation. This is a pragmatic step to accelerate collaboration and delivery. The third action, eliminate the problem of scale to a SIDS security in production initiative. This can maximize synergy among SIDS by aligning SIDS needs and production capacity, increasing security in sales of end product, and therefore enhancing the security of investment. This can also help promote diversification through niche, high-value crops. It is essential that we create linkages between the agricultural sector and key industries, particularly the ever-important tourism and hospitality sector, to create stable local and regional markets for agricultural produce. Fourth, create a sustainable capacity within and break the cycle. In 2023, I initiated a circular migration project that secured $400,000 in funding from international donors. This allocation presented a valuable opportunity to establish a rolling fund in Suriname, one that could have given students a chance to study and pay back into the fund, thus creating a cycle of continued opportunity, which could have strengthened local capacity and created lasting impact. In 2024, I asked the project lead if the money had gone to Suriname and how much of the money was left. To my shock, they told me the money was gone and it was all spent on consultants. Instead of building capacity within the country, the project leads opted to spend the resources towards paying first world consultancy services. This was not done out of malice, but this is the thought paradigm they are stuck in. While expertise from abroad can add value, it is more important to break the cycle and build capacity within the country. Without strong institutions and skilled human capital, even the best designed financing mechanisms or technology cannot deliver lasting transformation in the intended country. For SIDS, local capacity is the bridge between accessing finance and absorbing finance effectively. I truly want to thank the FAO for the great work they've done and they're doing. And I want to thank the FAO for the chance to speak here today, and I hope that my intervention hasn't been too taxing.
Reflections, and I would like us to confirm that it is, as it is always the case for these dialogues, we are recording this event, and that will be available, and we will share all the materials also that are being presented, so that you can keep track of all these good reflections and recommendations that are coming up. So now I would like to move to my colleague, Ms. Nadine Valla, Senior Natural Resource Officer and Coordinator of the FAO, GCF, and Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage Partnership in the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment, will now set the scene by identifying and sharing information on GCF readiness, GEF9 funding windows, and the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and the relevance to SID's agri-food system. So Nadine, welcome. You are a very critical player in FAO, having a very good understanding, having worked with most of the countries and being able to guide us in the most appropriate way in the context of the discussion today. So Nadine, the floor is yours, and I hope we can fix the screen, otherwise we cannot see the speaker here in Geneva. Over to you, Nadine.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, guests, and FAO colleagues. And thank you very much for inviting me. As Dominique said, I coordinate the FAO Green Climate Fund partnership and the new partnership with the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. But I will also say a few words about the FAO and GEF partnership in SIDS, and particular potential opportunities there may be. So I will share my screen, just a minute. So I think there have been already quite a little bit of presentation about how important it is and to support FAO, to support its member countries in their efforts to achieve food security, sustainable agriculture, and rural development, leaving no one behind. And I'm not going to explain all the topics here that I mentioned. These are examples of how FAO, beyond GCF, beyond GEF, Before Adaptation Fund, Loss and Damage Fund, work and support the SIDS. Clearly, there is a lot of focus on natural resource management and climate change resilience, because as we all know, SIDS are particularly vulnerable to the climate change. I'll dive immediately because we have very little time, and I always think it's good to leave time for question and answers. So the Green Climate Fund is celebrating this year its 10th anniversary already, and it's the largest climate fund which supports countries in raising and realizing their NDC ambitions towards meeting the Paris Agreement objective. In the Green Climate Fund, at least 50% of the adaptation allocation is targeted to the most vulnerable, including the SIDS. So SIDS are clearly a strong partners for the Green Climate Fund. Green Climate Fund has a number of financing instruments, or proposes a number of financing instruments: grants, loans, equities, guarantees. I heard one of the previous speakers speaking on the importance of concessionality and grants. So that's certainly something that Green Climate Fund is allocating. I think so the percentage of use of financing instruments in GCF is half grant and a half loan, equities, and guarantees. But for adaptation, there is a majority of the financing instruments which go through grants. There are different financing windows in the Green Climate Fund. One is a readiness and preparatory support program. The other one is funding proposals, project-specific assessment approach for entities to access the GCF resources even without being accredited to the fund, and private sector facility. A few words on the new readiness strategy, because I think it's particularly relevant for today's meeting. There is a 4.25 million allocation available for SIDS in the new readiness strategy. New because actually it just started last year, although it covers 2024, 2027, implementation of the new readiness strategy started as a transition in 2025 and in 2024, sorry, 25, 26, 27 will be are dedicated to implementing or to agreeing to funding under the new readiness strategy. So 4.25 million for the seats that's targeted for small island countries. And through the readiness, countries can access GCF resources for supporting them in accrediting national entities to be accredited entities who can access the GCF resources. GCF resources can only be accessed through an accredited entity, international, national, or regional. Direct access support is to facilitate accreditation of national or regional entities, for adaptation planning, for developing strategic frameworks, including a pipeline, so programming and pipeline, developing capacities, coordination mechanisms, knowledge sharing, and all this is now captured in GCF under country platforms and at the upcoming COP. So I will have to double check the date, but I can share it. So GCF will have a special event at the COP on the launching of country platforms under the readiness strategy. So which would be, again, a window open for many of the seats. So far, we have been providing the seats through with FAO support, have been recipient of 26 readiness grants and 3 funding proposals. The funding proposals are in Cuba, St. Lucia, which was approved in July last year, and Papua New Guinea, which was also approved last July, and Papua New Guinea also last July. So 3 very large projects which were approved for Cuba, St. Lucia, and Papua New Guinea, and 26 readiness grants under the previous cycle. I'm not going to describe all the readiness because there are a few more slides on GEF and FRLD, but just want to highlight how accessing readiness for the seats, for any country, but in particular for the seats, can be really part of a continuum and of a programming efforts toward accessing larger resources through the funding proposals. In the case of St. Lucia and Papua New Guinea, both countries had started requesting support from FAO through readiness, in the case of St. Lucia, to develop a concept note on climate resilient fisheries and to also formulate a national adaptation plan for fisheries. And these 2 readiness, the national adaptation plan and the development of the concept note, were then the basis that was used to develop a funding proposal of 25 million. In the case of Papua New Guinea, same thing. Papua New Guinea had achieved major emission reduction results between 2014 and 2016 and could access a special window of the GCF results-based payment, which is a reward for results achieved in the past years. But for Papua New Guinea to be able to access this window, a number of steps had to be completed in line with the UNFCCC requirement, and the readiness funds were used by Papua New Guinea to establish a monitoring level, to formally report on their results, to respond to the queries from the UNFCCC, and therefore be able to apply for the results-based payment program for a project which is worth $60 million. So the continuum between readiness and funding proposal is really important. A few words on the Global Environmental Facility. So it's the largest multilateral environmental fund, which is a financial mechanism for a number of conventions and not only climate related. And it works in it addresses multiple areas of work: biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, international waters, chemical and waste. GCF is climate change only. GEF has a much broader mandate. Now, what is important for the purpose of this meeting today is that GEF 9 will start next year for the next 5 years, and it will build on the GEF 8 integrated system approach, emphasizing nature-climate-people linkages, addressing the triple biodiversity climate pollution crisis, and priority to vulnerable countries, including SIDS and LDCs. So I'm sure that many of the SIDS who are represented today are already working on planning for GEF9 resources. And for those who are not, this is really important to consider this, as this will be coming next year. There are in GEF9 a number of integrated programs, like was the case in GEF8. Those who can be particularly interesting for the SIDS are the Blue and Green Islands integrated program, as well as a special climate change fund, which is a specialist fund for climate change adaptation investments in the SIDS, so targeting especially the SIDS. Finally, the other fund I wanted to spend a few words on is a fund for responding to loss and damage, which was established 3 COPs ago, so 2022, and which assists developing, or has as an objective to assist developing countries to respond to economic and non-economic loss and damage associated with adverse effects of climate change, including extreme weather events, like unfortunately what happened recently in Jamaica with Hurricane Melissa, and slow onset events. So sorry, it was established in 2023, so 2 years ago. It is promoting a country ownership approach, and this has been a lot of discussion at the highlight of all the past boards, how to ensure that the request not only comes from the country, which is also the case for GCF and GEF, but that really the funding will be benefiting the communities. It seeks to promote and strengthen national response systems, and the focus is on developing national response plans, enhancing climate information and data, and promoting equitable, safe, and dignified human mobility, which unfortunately happens in the case of as a result of climate change. Now, all this is fairly high level. There was a little bit, many more details provided last April when the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage approved the Barbados implementation modality, BIM, with an initial allocation of 250 million, which are available for 2025 and 2026, so for the coming 2 years, for projects between 5 and 20 million, grants only, 50% minimum allocation for SIDS and LDCs, again, strong focus on country ownership. Now, there has been extensive, for those of you who have followed that, there have been extensive discussions at the board, but finally the modalities or the funding as a project cycle and funding criteria were finally approved at the last board in Philippines in July. And a call for proposal will be announced, I think it's next Tuesday, 10th of November, at the COP by the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. So there will be the launch of the call for proposal, which will be open 2 weeks after the COP, and for which FAO is also available, like we do for the GCF, like we do for the GEF, to partner with countries and support them in accessing the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. I hope I haven't been too long, and I'm very much available, continue to be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadine, for this quick yet precise and very rich overview. Please stay with us because I'm sure there will be questions from our colleagues in Geneva, New York, and Brussels. So now we will hear from 2 different country perspectives as well as from the EU. So we have with us a representative from St. Lucia, Cabo Verde, and the European Commission. Will be sharing views on actionable recommendations to access and impact to enhance access and impact of climate and environment finance for SIDS across the regions. So we will now start with Ms. Nadia Welch-Yacinthe, who is the Chief Economist in the Department of Economic Development of the Government of St. Lucia. and national designated authority for the Green Climate Fund. So Ms. Welsh Jacinthe, St. Lucia experience demonstrate a clear continuum using GCF readiness support to develop its national adaptation plan and then advancing to a simplified approval process, SAP project, to implement that plan. Could you share how this process unfolded and what are the 3 top best practices that you would like to share today to ensure a programmatic approach leading to large-scale climate investments? The floor is yours.
Hey everybody, and thank you. And I'm very happy today to share St. Lucia's experience. In our case, the pathway from planning to investment didn't happen overnight. It evolved through different financing sources and partnerships over time. And just a little, not correction, but a little caveat to what Nadine presented. Our overall national adaptation plan was not developed through the GCF funding, but rather through a grant that was implemented by the UNDP under the JCCP, the Japan Caribbean Climate Change Partnership. And this project was concluded in 2018. It's in that project, what we were able to do was to develop our national adaptation plan along with a number of other sectoral adaptation strategies and action plans, for which fisheries was one of the key sectors that we focused on. We also developed the engagement strategy and communication strategy for climate change related interventions and climate financing action in St. Lucia. That process was very structured and sector driven, and it produced, what I said, 1 of 4 at the time, sectoral adaptation strategies and action plans. And so by the time St. Lucia began to engage with the GCF through our readiness, we had already have in place a strong evidence base for clearly prioritizing our adaptation needs. The value of the GCF support came afterwards, and we saw that through our work with the FAO in terms of strengthening our systems, creating that pipeline, and also shifting from a planning mode to an actual implementation. So with that first engagement with this, what we have today considered to be Fish Adapt, which is the SAP proposal, simplified approval process for the fisheries sector, we were able to engage with stakeholders in a very meaningful discussion that led to actual investment on the ground. So I think that really has served as a model for us and is what we intend to continue to pilot. This model, this SAP project model that we've used in terms of FAO advancing and being able to translate our SASAP into an investable proposal, we were able to go through the necessary technical studies and assessments that were required, and also strengthening the capacity of our fisherfolk cooperatives and our fisheries sector in terms of the institution to be able to implement the Fish Adapt today. We are now following that similar model, that pilot model that we've championed with FAO in the health sector with a second SAP proposal. And we are exploring similar pathways for education, tourism, and forestry. What I think is critical for us in that sector is we are trying to build this model not as a one-off project, but looking at the investment pipeline sector by sector and ensuring that it is anchored in our NAP, our SAPs, and our national development imperatives. Fish Adapt, if I could actually tell you some more about it. Fish Adapt really is a project which speaks to the adaptation needs of St. Lucia, very visible, because it is at the front lines of the coastal communities where fisher folks depend on what comes out of the sea with, like Nadine, somebody earlier spoke to the overfishing and the reduced catch, but also the erosion that happens on the coastline and how does that impact their livelihoods. That is a critical component of Fish Adapt. And the project really comes out of our fisheries SASAP. But what makes it different is the way it was able to pull in the different sectors, the different pieces, not just public climate finance, but the work of the cooperatives, the upgrades to fish landing sites and cold storage, processing, the inclusion of insurance to ensure that we're able to de-risk and reduce the impact of any weather events on the fisherfolk and on the sector. The technical expertise coming from FAO and other partners also contributed tremendously to building this project. And what we also were able to see how we could have ring fence or use complementary programs that were either approved or in the pipeline for approval to support and augment the impact of this project. For instance, we have the UBEC, which is financed through IDA resources through the World Bank. And that project really supports the coastal resilience aspects for St. Lucia. So it's a really complementary project. So instead, like I repeat again, instead of a one-off project, we are building a model where the finance, capacity, and sector institutions all move together. And that's what makes this initiative scalable and replicable for St. Lucia. In terms of best practices, I think I could start off with the plan. I mean, I'm a chief economist. My work is really involved in planning investments. So I'd say starting with the plan, but design is not all. We have to think of a pathway to investment, not just the SASAP document or the NAP document, but also the value that it brings to drive proposals and financing. There are lots of lessons learned in developing the plan, the outputs of the investment instruments that we want to look at. And instead of treating planning and project development as separate processes, integrating them from the inception. That is a key lesson. And I think every country, if we start with that perspective, we'll be able to see the benefits as we move forward. Strengthening the system, not just the proposal. Like I mentioned, we did not just look at the development of a proposal, a project, an investment proposal. We looked at the system, we looked at the transformative aspects, and we looked at the impact on livelihoods. So even in the design of our pipeline, it was not a standalone approach, and we ensured that we brought in all stakeholders from the day one into the discussion. So the readiness from the GCF really helped us to build the institutional architecture, and having a functioning NDA really supported this because the coordination across governments, and for St. Lucia, our NDA sits within our Department of Economic Development, which is also responsible for national planning and public sector investment programming. So it really does help when you are able to convene the key sectors around the key partners into that discussion and have a whole of country discussion on the impacts of a sector and the interrelated work that has to happen. So that has to be reinforced. And the third best practice, I would say, is leveraging our partnerships. And I really want to say, because when we started off with developing the Fisher Adapt, the SAP levels was not what it is today. And we were trying to put a project within that context. And we recognized we needed additional financing. In the design of the project, we actually started to look for alternative sources of funding. And when the scale of SAPs was increased, we were able now to benefit from that increase because we already had some work in progress that allowed us to leverage and really bring this initiative to life for the fishers cooperatives, for the FAO really did help us in being able to pull the key elements in terms of the real economic systems, looking at how it fits within not only the fisheries sector, the utilities, the impacts on health, the public health, the impact on the tourism sector. And it was really easier. Became easier to scale and blend and also bring in the issue of insurance. This discussion happened at the latter end of the project design, but it was a very beneficial discussion to help de-risk the project. And if you would allow me, I'd like to add a fourth, which is choosing the right delivery partner. I think where we are today, we would not have been if it wasn't for the FAO. FAO's processes and systems, their engagement with St. Lucia was very catalytic. It helped us accelerate our decision making. It helped us reduce a lot of rhetoric and nuanced discussion. It focused on the core elements of what would make a bankable project. We focused on the transformative aspects of the fisheries sector, what would lead to improved livelihoods and reducing the risk for the people at the front line when it comes to climate change. And I think that was the lessons and best practices we saw. So I would really highlight that one as a critical one. understanding the partner that you're going to select and choosing that partner from very early, working with that partner hand in glove, because that ensures that you reduce the time it takes in back and forth. I mean, projects take time to develop, you get through a number of iterations, but your resources are limited both in terms of people and funding, and you want to be efficient. So the project outcomes that you want to achieve, if you have a good partner that is sound, a good partner that has experience and understands your context, it is easier for us to be able to advance. So for us, readiness was not just about funding window, it was seen as a mechanism for building an architecture for St. Lucia for long-term climate investment planning across sectors, across partners, and beyond the life of any single project. Like I said, we're replicating the similar model for other areas within our National Adaptation Plan, and we intend to continue partnering as we move forward. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for sharing. I would say quite a lot of lessons from the process in St. Lucia. But building on that, would you please say a few words on how a country like St. Lucia has been promoting also greater complementarity across funds in addressing adaptation, resilience, and mitigations, and how this could be further applied now that we are looking at the loss and damage fund process? Briefly.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, it's quite a question,
yeah.
but if you could be brief.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. I think the key critical thing is coordination, having that central node for coordination. And that is what we've recognized. So much so that our government, our cabinet, has actually approved the establishment of a climate finance unit that will bring all this discussion into the single space. So we don't have duplication, we avoid the errors of the past, and we learn to leverage and really bring things forward. That we have the power of convening, and we also can benefit from a single dialogue in one direction with a clear vision. So I think coordination is the critical area here, because you have the complementary funds. You have the GEF, the Adaptation Fund, you have the Green Climate Fund, you have bilaterals, we have the L&D Fund, but we need to ensure that we understand what these funds all promote and being able to map it with our own needs. So we are aligned, we avoid duplication, we ensure that there's synergies, and we're able to move forward in the single direction. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much for sharing your views and sharing the experience you have built and the good partnership I understand you have had with FAO. Now we'll be traveling across the ocean to Cabo Verde, where we will hear from Mr. Alexandre Nevsky Medina Rodriguez, who is the National Secretary for Climate Action in the National Secretariat for Climate Action and GEF operational focal point in Cabo Verde. Mr. Nevsky Medina Rodriguez, Cabo Verde is one of the countries who has successfully accessed GEF 6, 7, and 8 windows, including the special climate change funds for seeds. In your views, what elements of Cabo Verde GEF portfolio could be replicated or adapted to other seeds, particularly regarding innovation, integrated approach, or stakeholder engagement? We look forward to hearing from you, sir.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for the question. First of all, I would like to thank FAO for inviting Cabo Verde to take part in this important dialogue for the exchange of knowledge and experience. In the GEF portfolio, Cabo Verde has currently has 6 active national projects, 1 from GEF 6, 3 from GEF 7, and 2 from GEF 8, with an overall budget of around $24 million in GEF grants and more than $124 million in co-financing. This means that for every $1 from the GEF, we leverage $5 national. So this Active projects were designed to improve the standards and policies for natural resource management with the aim of strengthening livelihoods and the country resilience. Therefore, they are not isolated projects, even though they are implemented through different GEF cycles and by different GEF agencies. And this approach leads us to the first experience I consider relevant to share. Anchoring and designing the portfolio based on the country development plans. This may seem obvious, but it does not always happen in every country, and resulting in the implementation of projects that have local impact, but do not contribute significantly to the achievement of the country's long-term national objectives or the desired systemic transformation. Another key lesson I'd like to share concerns the involvement of stakeholders, including civil society. In addition to engaging them in the project design, they must also be properly involved in its implementation. How do you do this? Through partnership agreements. The stakeholders and their skills are mapped, and based on this mapping, we sign partnership agreements that allow the transfer of funds for the execution of specific project activities. The benefits here are substantial. Stakeholders' capacity are strengthened, they feel part of the project and are directly involved in achieving the project's results. Lastly, I consider the water, energy, food nexus approach to be particularly relevant. Cabo Verde, as a Saharan seeds, has lived with the challenge of droughts since its discovery. This situation, combined with the growing population and the effects of climate change, has made water scarcity a serious problem in the country. For more than 50 years now, Cabo Verde has used desalinated water for human consumption. Today, of the 9 inhabited islands in Cabo Verde, only 1 does not use desalinated water. Since 2016, we have begun planning to use desalinated water for agriculture as well. As you can imagine, this water is extremely expensive, with one of the main contributing factors being the use of fossil fuels for its production and distribution. Therefore, we have started to replace and complement water production using the renewable energy, making it mandatory that all new production and distribution systems are equipped with renewable energy. We developed a project under the GF6 cycle to help adjust policies and create standards of regulation for this purpose. The use of renewable energy and water efficiency in irrigation are now mandatory in agricultural projects. To conclude, and in bullet points, we can also highlight the following projects, all led by FRLD. The agri-food adaptation with nature-based solution, which aims to integrate adaptation in FRLD policies, demonstrate agroecological practice and nature-based solution in watersheds, and establish a national knowledge platform along with a nationwide training program. And these, for me, are clear, modular, and replicable outcomes. The second is the land degradation neutrality project, which aims to create a land degradation neutrality decision support system, a basin level land degradation neutrality plans, and a large-scale training of technicians and producers. That is a practical path to restore fragile island soils. And the last one, the blue and the green islands, which 4 pillars in a single problem: governance, nature-based solution, green and blue finance ecosystem, and knowledge, plus a clear map of barriers to remove. Again, it's an excellent model for multi-sector work in cities. So the main message in this is combine policy, pilot projects, stakeholders engagement, training, data platforms, and finance, all to strengthen resilience while keeping explicit targets for gender and youth. This is the true line across projects in Cabo Verde, and we believe it can be replicated in other cities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nevsky Medina Rodriguez. And same way we asked for our colleague from St. Lucia, I would like to ask you also to share how the experience you have acquired in Cabo Verde has been promoting greater complementarity across funds in addressing adaptation, resilience, and mitigation in SIDS. And how could this be now further applied in the context of the loss and damage fund? Over to you.
So thank you again. Yeah, thank you. So Cabo Verde used 4 strategy documents as the backbone for developing its climate policy. We have the strategy plan from the Sustainable Development, the NDC, the NAP, and the long-term strategy for the decarbonization of the economy. Of course, these documents are complemented by sectoral strategy documents. And to ensure complementary among these strategic documents, the strategic plan from climate support mobilization was recently approved. It's a robust document aiming at ensuring synergy between funds, programs, and projects. And this strategic plan mapped all projects across all sectors, including civil society and universities, identified gaps and overlaps, define priorities by outcomes, and organize a single proposal pipeline with common criteria, data, safeguards, co-financing, and risk management. It also established a clear decision-making pathway from preparation to execution and a financial vehicle to channel resources from different sources. As a result, each fund now has a well-defined role. For example, the GEF and the Special Climate Change Fund for SIDS finance reforms, systems, and demonstration, while financial partners contribute to expansion and operations. The strategic plan also creates a monitoring and reporting framework to track mobilized amounts, approvals, and territorial efforts, reducing decision-making time and avoid duplication. And how do you take this logic to loss and damage? The PMAC, the strategic plan, requires common data systems and indicators, like I said. We use these to separate prevention from the residual, that say what has already been reduced by adaptation projects and what, despite this, still results in loss and damage. On this basis, we intend to prepare a proposal for the loss and damage funding, following the same pathways defined in the PMAC. In short, the strategic document for mobilization of action source enables us to align funds by stage and by outcomes. We keep, for example, again, the GEF and the Special Climate Fund focused on risk prevention. We document the residual with our system, and we use the same pipeline and the Climate and Environmental Fund, this new framework from the climate finance that we have in Cabo Verde to mobilize additional funds. This is what warrants coherence, speed, and aggregate impact. And it's also worth noting that we have established climate markers for expenditures in the state budget. This is also a way to avoid the duplication and ensure through the state budget that funding is directed where it's most needed. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for briefing us on the impressive achievements and these links between the policy, strategy, implementation, and all the coherence that you have put in place in Cabo Verde, and that can indeed inform the work being done in other SIDS countries. Thank you very much, sir. And now let's have the EU perspective. And for that, we have Ms. Alexandra Zgobi, who heads the Climate Finance Unit of the EU Directorate General for Climate Action. Ms. Zgobi, welcome. Small island developing states face significant challenges in transforming their agri-food system while enhancing resilience to climate change. From your perspective as head of unit at DG Klima, how can climate and environment financing including mechanisms such as the GCF, GEF Adaptation Fund, and the newly established FRLD. How can these funds help SIDS address these challenges? Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day to everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting the Commission to join this very interesting and important dialogue. But let me also start by expressing our deepest condolences and solidarity to the people and communities in the Caribbean who have suffered and are suffering from the devastating impact of Hurricane Melissa. The EU has just released 5 million euros to support the emergency response in Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti, and this is, of course, on top of the relief supplies that are being channeled by our member states in the same area through the EU civil protection mechanism. And of course, beyond this immediate relief, we are partnering and working with the EU and SIDS in other regions of the world to build resilience, deal with disasters, including, of course, those that are associated with climate change impact. And I think this is really yet another stark reminder of how weather-related disasters, which are clearly exacerbated by climate change, are threatening the very foundation of many countries and communities. And of course, this holds particularly true for seeds. Agri-food systems are clearly not an exception. To the contrary, as we've heard from previous speakers, many seeds actually depend on agri-food system, with more than 60% of the population in the Pacific, for instance, that are relying on subsistence agriculture and fisheries. Whereas some seeds are, highly dependent on food imports, many are also dependent on agri-food exports for their foreign currency earnings. So it's quite clear that many small islands are vulnerable through the impact that climate change can have on agri-food systems. We're just witnessing that right now. Perhaps on the bright side, if I may say so, we also see that many small island states already have a very strong integrated framework for dealing with adaptation and resilience into their national development plans and sectoral strategies. And this is confirmed by the Adaptation Gap report that was published just last week. But more importantly, I think today we've heard some testimonies to this, and very good examples from colleagues who have spoken before me. There's also, I think, a global, hopefully some indication, if we look at climate finance flows globally, that we are moving the needle on climate finance, and in particular for adaptation. The Adaptation Finance Gap report also highlights that we have a higher share of finance that is now flowing to vulnerable countries, including seeds, as well as least developed countries. And of course, we still see a gap in adaptation finance, but what we also see, and we see many examples of that, is that we are getting better to get more out of each dollar or euro rather than we invest. We have more effective, better targeted, and more scaled up adaptation actions. And these are all elements that can help us have more impact and that we can take into account when we support the seeds in dealing with climate change challenges across the various sectors. The third point that I wanted to highlight when it comes to global finance flows for adaptation is that there is a huge untapped potential in the private sector. I think the Adaptation Gap report estimates an additional 50 billion per year that could be mobilized. And there is a big role for us to help, internationally, but also for governments domestically, to put in place targeted policy actions, as well as the use of blended finance solutions that could help mobilize these resources. Just a word on the EU's own commitment. I think we remain firmly committed to accelerating our global efforts towards climate change adaptation. I think it's quite striking to see that in the period between 2019 and 2023, we, together with our member states, have increased international financial contribution for adaptation action by 75%. And the EIB our, the European Investment Bank, which is the climate bank of Europe, has quadrupled actually its adaptation financing in developing countries between 2022 and 2024. So I think we are trying to put efforts where we think the priorities lie. Of course, there is no room for complacency. I mean, I think that is also quite clear. If we look at the recent report from the Climate Policy Initiatives, we see that still a dismal share of international global adaptation finance flows actually to seeds. And we don't need to argue about the exact figure. I think the conclusion is quite clear. We need to do more. What is also clear from our own experience and from what we've heard already today is that we can actually do much more. And if I were to give, in concluding, just one example of where the vertical climate funds could perhaps intervene in specifically in the agri-food systems, based on our experience, key actors in these landscapes are farmers' organizations that can help channel resources, whether it is financial resources or knowledge, and put them to action to have impact that can benefit communities. And I think this resonates quite well with what we've heard just now from the colleagues from St. Lucia's and Cabo Verde, who highlighted similar lessons learned in their own domestic experience. And we see a potential role for the vertical climate funds, for instance, to really enhance how they deal with farmer organizations and facilitate access to farmers' organizations to finance for communities and smallholders.
Well, thank you very much for indeed sharing the Commission perspective on the topic, but also for giving us an idea of the scale, of the magnitude of the effort, and it's the very significant increase in funding and investment that have been going to the area over the last couple of years. But further building on that, if I may, could you please share the Commission's priorities, experience, and approaches for improving access to, effectiveness, and impact of climate finance, including support to sustainable and resilient agri-food system? The floor goes back to you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'd be happy to share some thoughts on that. And our starting point really is the new collective quantified goal that we agreed in COP29, and the ambassador in opening also mentioned. This is for us a very good framework to guide international climate finance for developing countries over the next decade. I think the broad scope of the NCQG is crucial, and so is the increased attention that the NCQG draws to adaptation, as the ambassador already outlined. And for us, in implementing the NCQG, the priorities and specificities of seeds as well as of LDCs, least developed countries, must really come first. This is also why in June we held a ministerial level dialogue with seeds and LDCs that really, the fourth conference on financing for development in Sevilla, they really highlighted this shared commitment of seeds, LDCs, and the EU to really work towards ensuring that in implementing the NCQG, we can actually turn our commitments into tangible outcomes for those that are most at risk. I think if I look at our priorities to do that, I would highlight perhaps four. Four seems to be the number in this dialogue, as many before me also had some, four lessons to share. The first area that I think we need to work on is making sure that we use public finance, international public finance, in a more targeted and impactful way. There is a clear urgent need to scale up grant-based and concessional finance, and for us this is essential to support communities that have limited adaptive capacity and are disproportionately affected by climate change. Seeds and LDCs in the first place, as usual. And we are starting to act on our priorities already. We just released our new climate finance figures. The EU in 2024 provided nearly 32 billion euro in climate finance, and of these 30% was fully dedicated to adaptation, with an additional 20% supporting both mitigation and adaptation. And 2/3 were either grants or concessional and highly concessional finance. We also support regional programs that build resilience in agri-food systems, working with farmers' organizations. Just to mention two, the Farmers' Organizations for Impact program in the Asian Pacific region, and the Sustainable Food System Transition through Agroecological Innovation at Scale that is operating in the Western Indian Oceans. Of course, agri-food system also require infrastructure and resilient infrastructure for that. So we're working through our Global Gateway strategy to support investments in, for instance, rehabilitation of ports that are necessary in Cabo Verde, Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, for instance, or in renewable energy projects infrastructure in Fiji, PNG again, and various countries in the Caribbean. The second priority for us is making sure that the multilateral development banks can deliver the solutions that are needed to unlock large-scale investments. I think they have the instrument, we've heard them before, blended finance, local currency finance for hedging solutions, to de-risk investments and enhance transparency of risks and data. So from the EU side, we have been calling on all shareholders of the MDBs to support the necessary strengthening of the MDBs themselves to deliver at scale and align with the Paris Agreement. And we're working very closely with the EIB, our own MDB, if you wish, to develop a pipeline of adaptation finance investments that will have also focus on seeds. So hopefully we'll be able to share more very soon. The third element is improving access, which we've heard a lot about. And for this, we need really a stronger coordination across modalities, whether it is financing from the MDBs, from bilateral donors or multilateral channels, or of course, the vertical climate funds. There has been a lot of progress on the vertical climate funds, and we welcome that very much. We have joint planning and programming missions from the GCF and the GF, for instance, a stronger focus on programmatic approaches, and we need to do more of that. From our perspective, we also need to ensure a clear allocation of finance for seeds and LDCs within the climate funds, as we are piloting already, in a sense, through the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and the Barbados implementation modality. The last element that I want to mention is that of unleashing, if you wish, the potential of innovative instruments that can channel capital into climate action and boost domestic resource mobilization. We have a couple of examples in the EU. We're working on currency exchange risks, for instance, through the TCX. We're working on mobilizing finance through the Global Green Bond initiatives that is already piloting activities in the Dominican Republic and Barbados, but we're also supporting strongly the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, for instance, which is seeking to introduce a coordinated domestic levies across sectors that are polluting. And aviation, through Premium Flyers Coalition, and has already started working in earnest, and many seeds are actually member of the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force. So, just to wrap up, we do have the NCQG. We need to make sure it works for seeds and helps them in meeting the challenges they face through these 4 priorities that can deliver results in the short term. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Zgobi, indeed, for highlighting the Commission priorities and strategies to enhance climate finance and support sustainable, resilient agri-food system, and for also sharing 4 very clear lessons that we will be documenting in the proceedings of this event. And it's clear that the national experience of St. Lucia, Cabo Verde, and the insights you have been provided are particularly encouraging, I would say. And I trust that alongside the observation shared in the opening remarks today, this will inspire further action in other states in support of more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food system. So now we still have a couple of minutes before going to the last speaker today. And so I would like to open the floor for potential remarks, questions, feedback here in the room, but also virtually using the Q&A module if you want. So any comments here in the room? Not that. Please, Ambassador from IT.
Yes, so first of all, thank you so much for all, thank you so much for all these valuable and important information. And I had a question regarding the different funds, and I wanted to know how is there a particular way to actually try to see if a particular country can benefit from those different funds? Is there like a certain way? Like I would like to know how can we actually benefit from those different funds, and so that's my possible question.
Okay, thank you. And this will go, I believe, to our colleague Nadine.
Nadine, yes.
Perhaps any other question here, comment?
Can I
Yes,
just-
please, Ambassador from Guyana.
One of the issues that have come up is the difficulty of countries, 6 countries, to get grants in particular, but also loans, concessional loans. And part of that has to do with many 6 countries being classified under middle income. And so the eligibility requirements, because in many cases, the use of GDP, for example, grants, if I go to ones that I'm familiar with, like Global Fund, and so if you're above a certain GDP, you're not eligible to get the grant. But the vulnerability of these countries, as seen by Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba recently, one disaster that lasts a few hours and knock out your GDP. And so the vulnerability is not considered. And I'm wondering that in recent times, I believe earlier this year, the UN approved a new measure. It's not a new measure, but they approved it for use. The multidimensional vulnerability index rather than GDP. And I'm wondering whether in the various systems that we have discussed today, the UN system and funding facilities such as GEF and so on, whether there is any thought being given to the use of multidimensional variability index. And quickly on the second one, because Guyana, in early times when we were a highly indebted poor country, in my own lifetime, I'm watching it going from there to high income. But we had, with the European Union, budgetary support rather than traditional loans. So it's a loan, but instead of going through the normal loan process, it went through into the consolidated fund, and then the government determined its use, whether these things are being given further consideration, particularly for SIDS countries.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ambassador from the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States.
Yes, very quickly. I just want to add a particular twist to what Ambassador Ramsamy has just said. So, I take his words and make them my own. But in the context of OECS, we have had that same situation with GDP per capita being used as criteria for eligibility. And what we have found is that, you know, the OECS treaty obliges cooperation across all the member states. It's a treaty embedded mandate. But and this is led by the international financial institutions who basically set the standards, which others will follow. So we have had, in trying to implement projects across the OECS, we have had certain member states qualify and certain member states are not qualified, so that there are gaps, and you have uneven implementation, uneven development.
To have regional approach. And
Yes, simply conditioned by the conditionality based on GDP per capita.
Okay, thank you very much for these comments.
Yeah, no.
You want to add something from
No,
Cabo
thank
Verde?
you so much for organizing this dialogue. Today, Cabo Verde is represented by our colleague in the capital, Nevsky. I like also to headline this because Cabo Verde also says the same problem. And since they always count on GDP, I think they need also to consider our vulnerabilities. So now we see what happened to Jamaica, to Haiti, and to Cuba. So like also to fit this equation to show our solidarity to Jamaica, to Haiti, and to Cuba. Cabo Verde recently also faced the same problem with the Hurricane Erin. So I would like also only to align myself with my colleagues that preceded me, because of course we have this problem that always our partners of development, they focus on our GDP and they don't focus on our vulnerability. Maybe we will need to work on this with our partners to see how we can face this this problem.
So key point emerging from this discussion and your suggestion on the multidimensional vulnerability index. So I may invite comments from perhaps my colleague Nadine and perhaps Ms. Gobi want to come up as well to give her thoughts on the comments that were made by the colleagues here in the room. And thank you very much for these comments. Nadine.
Yeah, thank you very much for very relevant questions. On the first one, from Her Excellency from Haiti, how countries can access these funds, GCF, GEF, and the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. All these funds work through accredited entities, implementing entities. GEF and GCF work through accredited or implementing entities, which are cleared by the GEF and the GCF. And countries, the requests have to come from the countries through the GEF focal point or GCF National Designated Authority, NDA, ou Autorité Nationale Désignée, en français, AND, who are the ones who at country level have the authority and the mandate given to them, I mean, by the government to plan and oversee all GEF and GCF resources for the country. So Haiti, for example, I believe, I'm sure, has requested FAO support through the GEF focal point in Haiti to access GEF 8. And Haiti has also made a request to FAO through the GCF National Designated Authority to access GCF resources. The GEF project is finalized, if I'm not wrong, and the GCF one is under formulation. So the requests from the countries have to come through the national governments. For the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, this is fairly new fund, so FAO will be an accredited entity to the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, as many others who are also accredited to GEF and GCF. And the same system, there is a focal point for the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage that has to be appointed by the government. And I believe that Haiti, Haiti has already appointed a focal point, a national focal point for managing the partnership with the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. I'll just say a few. So that's the way. The request has to come from the country. Constitutionality, just a few words. I really followed a lot of attention with the discussions that took place. For those of you who may have followed the last GCF board last week, there has been one case of a country which is not a SIDS, but which is an upper middle income country, and for which a funding proposal was rejected on the ground of concessionality. So it was not a SIDS, but certainly concessionality is a very hot topic. Now, I can't speak on behalf of GEF and GCF, but what I have seen so far with the GCF and GEF is that for SIDS, this is priority, and there is a high recognition from both funds of the very high vulnerability beyond the GDP of those countries. So, whereas at least in the GCF, we are asked to justify why a grant and why not loans. For SIDS, so far, this has been accepted by the GCF. But certainly this is a very important topic, and that we are monitoring very closely, because GCF are not World Bank or are not multi-development MDBs. Sorry, I'm very excited. I've come back from the board and I have a little bit of difficulty in my work. They are not international financing institutions, as the World Bank was the African Development Bank, was the Asian Development Bank. They have been set up as an alternative to those banks. So very important topic, I guess, to follow up also at COP next week and coming weeks. Over.
Thank you very much, Nadine. I don't know if other colleagues, Ms. Gobi or colleagues from Cabo Verde on St. Lucia, want to react to the comments?
If I may, 2 words on this very good question of vulnerability. I think this, how to take into due account countries' vulnerability in determining eligibility or similar issues is really popping up in various fora. But what works in one may not work in another, as it is, as you can imagine, a complex issue that has many different ramifications. But what I did wanted to highlight is that we need to consider the full landscape when we think about financing climate action and in fact financing development as a whole, and look at the whole toolbox, of course, bilateral and multilateral grants, but also budget support, general sectoral loans with different degrees of concessionality or not, guarantees, vertical climate funds, innovative instruments such as carbon pricing. In our own experiences in the EU with the emission trading system, these are really important tools to mobilize the resources that you can reinvest in decarbonizing your economy as well. But of course, also the IMF that we haven't talked about today has a very important role to play through its own instruments. So, we need to look at the overall landscape and pick and choose the right mix that is suitable for the circumstances of each country. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I don't see any other colleague who wanting to take the floor. So now I'd like to, we are actually over the allocated time, but we had a slightly longer agenda. So please allow for a couple more minutes. But we will have my colleague, Angelica Racome, the director of the FAO Liaison Office in New York, who is going to deliver a few reflection and concluding remarks today. Angelica, thank you for being with us as well, and in this co-organized event between New York, Geneva, Brussels, and Rome. So please, Angelica.
Thank you, Dominique. And at the outset, allow me to join in with the expressions of solidarity with all the countries affected by Hurricane Melissa. Today, we have heard firsthand from small island development states about experiences in mobilizing climate and environmental finance through the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environmental Facility funding windows. and the importance of this finance in supporting agri-food systems transformation. We also learned about emerging funds, such as the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and how past experience can be leveraged to support future access to emerging funds. The experiences shared by St. Lucia and Cabo Verde, among others, have shared practical pathways and offered guidance for other SIDS to transform their agri-food systems to be more resilient and sustainable. However, there are no silver bullets. Climate financing for agri-food systems is insufficient. As our colleagues from the Office of Climate Change and Biodiversity and Environment have noted, in 2021, 2022, it was estimated only around 7.2% was allocated to agri-food system of climate finance. And as we are all aware, we're in a context of dwindling resources. Simultaneously, fragmented efforts result in an inefficient use of already scarce resources. Yet, as noted by the chair of AOSIS, inaction is not an option. We need to do more, as emphasized by the European Union, and probably with less. Achieving food security and nutrition while also tackling the impacts of climate shocks is existential, particularly in the case of SIDS. It is this sense of urgency, along with the recognition of a need for a common framework with shared language based on solid evidence to coordinate stakeholders, as mentioned by Cabo Verde, convening the key partners. This includes civil society and private sector at the global, regional, and local levels to drive action that led FAO to launch the global roadmap to achieve food security and nutrition in the context of climate actions at COP28. It is an iterative process that fosters policy cohesion and seeks to manage trade-offs, increase synergies, facilitate international cooperation, and develop bankable projects that demonstrate return on investment to attract funding. And in the cases referred to in the room, it also aims at developing non-bankable funds, which need different instruments. The roadmap, and here replying to the call from St. Lucia, contributes to systemic thinking across 10 domains of action, as well as sectoral action with 120 actions to be selected based on the specific context. No one size fits all. The roadmap also monitors progress through 20 milestones. Today's complex environment demands our collective and coordinated action. And the roadmap, which I invite you to explore, offers us an opportunity to address multiple challenges with concrete solutions that bring people and processes together on the path to achieve good food for all for today and tomorrow. So I wish to thank you all, the speakers, the participants, my fellow colleagues from the liaison offices and the Office of Climate, Biodiversity and Environment of FAO for sharing insights and perspectives, and we hope to continue the discussion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelica. I think we are reaching the end. Thank you again to the panelists for sharing their views, ideas, as well as to you in the room for putting the issue on the table that will need further discussion. Thank you very much for that. Of course, we stand in full solidarity, as was said, and will remain closely connected to the countries that are facing immediate threat, but also to the others that need to prepare for threats that we know are going to become more frequent and more intense. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you to my colleagues in Rome, Brussels, New York, and see you soon for edition number 10 of the SIDS Dialogue. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.